Hi everybody, so I am here today to do my December wrap-up. I have read 11 books in December. It is currently December 28th, and I am not anywhere near done with any of the books I'm sort of reading and anything. So I'm assuming that that's all of the books that I'm going to get to this month, and if not, I will just show you later in my January wrap-up. So I read 11 books, as I said. Some of them were audio, some of them I just don't have with me right now because I was reorganizing. But yeah, the first book I finished in December was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And after I read this, I immediately went onto Book Depository to order the collection of stories that goes with this book, because oh my goodness, this book made me emotional. It was really interestingly written, actually, because it is translated, so it was just really a different style of writing that I'm not used to, but I did really enjoy it, and I'm very excited to read the next book in this little universe. But this is about a cafe where you can time travel if you sit in this particular spot, but the book is so much more about the relationships of the people in the story more than the time travel, which I really enjoyed. So this was a 5-star read. I read this actually for the Books Unbound book club, and my clip was in the podcast episode, which was really cool. But yeah, I really loved this one. Actually, it was a pretty spectacular reading month. I think this is the most 5-star reads I've had in any month this year. I'll have to do the math on that, but I really had a great reading month in December. I read a lot, and I loved the books I read, for the most part. So then I read Go With The Flow by Lily Williams, which I don't have with me. It is a graphic novel about a group of friends who are kind of fighting for period kind of rights in their school so that they have access to pads and tampons and all of that. And it was a very... it's a YA, but it felt like a J, like a juvenile, chilled middle grade kind of graphic novel. It was very juvenile seeming, even though the topics discussed obviously were feminism and periods and all of that, but the writing and the style just felt really juvenile. So I gave that one, I believe, 3 stars. I enjoyed the topic of it. I enjoyed what they were trying to say, but the execution wasn't my favorite. The next book I read was The Shame by McKenna Goodman, and oh my goodness, this is a 5-star read for me. I loved it so much. I actually read it, I read the library copy, and then I went to a bookshop shortly thereafter and had to pick it up because it is just wonderful. It is about this woman who lives in the middle of nowhere in Vermont with her husband and her kids, and they are kind of reclusive, they're farmers, they do everything themselves, like completely self-sustaining, and she decides to up and leave one day and just go. And it was just such an interesting examination of the psychology of the character. It made me wonder so much about how she really got to that point. They do delve into it a lot because this story is told in a series of flashbacks, but I just wanted more. It is a very slim novel, and I just wanted to know more about the psychology of this character. So I really loved this one, and the cover is just magnificent. Alright, next I read Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which I don't have a physical copy of to show you, but it was a kind of really like poetically, strangely written story about two boys and their dad who have just lost their mom/wife, and grief comes in the form of a crow, and it's kind of this interaction between the crow and the family. The concept was very interesting, but honestly, I found it to be a little bit too weird for me. I couldn't really understand what was going on. The writing was just very odd. Anytime that they talked about the crow, the writing was just kind of like very strange. So it wasn't my favorite. I think I ended up giving it 2 or 3 stars. I don't remember. But yeah, then I read The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. So this was a random book that I found at a used bookstore like last summer, and it was such a cool find. That cover is so interesting and just really cute. But it sounded like a really fun read. It is set in, I believe, England in the 50s. and it is about a woman who is trying to start a bookshop. And all of the people in the town that she's trying to start the bookshop in just hate her and don't want her to have this bookshop. And it's just kind of about how she works through that. And I won't spoil it if anyone wants to read this, how it goes. But it's sad, it's sweet, it's fun. And it was very nice. I gave it 4 stars because there were certain parts of it that got a little bit dry. I think a lot of that has to do with just like the, the age of the book. Obviously, it's like 70 years old. So there's definitely a different writing style now than there was then, so I kind of have to account for that. But 4 stars, loved it. It was really cool. Next, I read one of my favorite books of the year. This is Hysteria, I can't speak, Hysteria by Jessica Gross, and that cover is also very, very interesting. It's a lady upside down, but it was one of the strangest books I've ever read. It is about a woman who is going through a lot of kind of emotional trauma, trying to figure it out. She spends most of her time at bars, and she's also kind of like sex obsessed. Like she's all the time thinking about it, and can't get away from it, and is trying to heal herself basically through that. And she decides to go to a bar one day, and she thinks that she sees Sigmund Freud as one of the bartenders. And there's this whole saga of her trying to talk to Freud and what he says and how that relates to her life. And it was so weird and trippy and crazy, and one of the strangest books I've ever read. But I was reading this during a time where I felt really depressed, and I kind of just laid in bed all day. It was right after I finished my degree. And I just felt like there was nothing to do other than read this book. So I just laid in bed and read the book. And I felt like, even though the psychological things manifest differently between me and this character, I felt a kind of kindred spirit with her because I was going through just kind of a depressing time. So I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it so much. It was one of my favorite books of the year for sure. Okay, then I read The Harpy by Megan Hunter, which also, amazing covers this month too. Wow, great covers. But this is about a woman, there's a lot of books about women who are having psychological weird issues. But basically this is a mom of 2 boys, and her husband cheats on her. And so she starts to go on this kind of deal with him that if she hurts him back 3 times, then they're even. And it's about that psychology, and it's just most of this novel was so poignant and interesting, and the psychology of this character was fascinating. But somehow at the end of the book, the title made more sense, because throughout there was a couple of little vignettes about the idea of a harpy. But at the end, I won't tell you what happens, but that kind of manifested it in a very weird way. And that's what bumped this down to a 4 star for me, because I loved everything else about this book other than the very end. So I couldn't, in good conscience, give it a 5 out of 5, but 4 out of 5. And then I read a couple of books that I don't have the physical copies of. I read A Man Called Uva by Friedrich Bachmann, which everybody pretty much knows about, but it's about an old man who lives in this little neighborhood, and this family comes and annoys the living crap out of him, basically. But so A Man Called Uva is about an older man who is depressed and suicidal after the death of his wife 6 months before. And it's about this family that comes into the neighborhood that he lives in and kind of annoys the living crap out of him, but keeps him alive because he feels like he has a purpose again. So I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it. Then I read Daddy by Emma Cline, which is a short story collection, which I can't say that I really liked that much. I think I gave it a 2 star. It was sometimes interesting and sometimes not. Then I read The New Me by Hallie Butler as an audiobook, and this is about a young woman who is trying to find herself, and she's in this job that she doesn't really think she likes, and she ends up getting moved from the job because she isn't very good at really anything, it seems like. It was an interesting book, but it just felt a little bit bland to me because I had read so many great books about like women with interesting psychological traits that it just fell a little bit flat. And then the final book that I read, oh my god, I love this book. It is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. I was so weirded out by this book. It's one of the weirdest books, but that's Ottessa Moshfegh for you. She writes weird books. And I should have known that after I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, that she was going to throw something weird at me. But the first, like, half of this book, I was like, what? What is happening? I'm confused. Well, not necessarily confused, but grossed out, weirded out. This character is just so unlikable, which is so cool. Like, I love that. I love when there's unlikable characters that you have to somehow find something to relate to them with, or some kind of bit of understanding so that you can enjoy the book. But this is about a woman who has lived in this town called Xville near Boston for all of her life, and she has an alcoholic father, and eventually she up and leaves, and it's about the kind of week preceding her leaving town. So such an interesting book, such a crazy, weird book, but I loved how it was written, and I highly recommend picking this up if you like weird books. So those are all of the books that I read in December. Alright, so now on to the portion of the video where I show you all of the books that I got this month. So it was a little bit of a lighter book buying month because of Christmas, but I did get a few things, so I'll show you those. So I got Create Dangerously, The Power and Responsibility of the Artist by Albert Camus, I think. This is just a really, really teeny tiny cute book just about art, and I know pretty much nothing about it, but it sounded really cool when I was at the bookshop, and I picked it up. Then, also on the same bookshop trip, I picked up Animal Wife by Laura Ehrlich. This is just a short story collection that examines motherhood and womanhood and a bunch of those kind of things. So yeah, really interesting cover, and I'm excited to read this. I'm not sure when I'm going to pick it up, but it looks really, really interesting. Then I got The Awakening by Kate Chopin, and this is, I've read a couple of stories by Kate Chopin, and I just wanted to read this is her novel that she published. So interesting cover as well, very odd, and I'm excited to get into this. Then I started using Book of the Month. This was the first month that I used Book of the Month, and the book I chose was Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi. And I really loved Homegoing when I read it by the same author, and this just sounded really interesting. I am always fascinated by books that deal with, you know, kind of reckoning with religion. So this sounded super, super interesting, and it's really, really pretty with the Book of the Month. Like the Under the Dust Jacket is really beautiful, and it's just a really, really pretty book, and I'm excited to read it. So then I picked up Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this is a book that Ariel Bissett has recommended multiple times, and I've been really, really into translated fiction lately, ever since I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, so definitely excited to read this one. Then I picked up Sourdough, or Lois and Her Adventures in the Underground Market by Robin Sloan. So I already had Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan, and I've read that one as well as Sourdough, but I didn't have a copy of Sourdough, and this was one of my favorite reads. I believe it was last year, and I'm really excited to reread it. I'm hoping to reread it in the new year as well. Alright, and then I already talked about these two, but I got them at this really, really cool bookshop in Rhinebeck, New York, and it is obviously Hysteria and The Shame. So I picked those up and pretty much immediately read them, which was really, really cool. I never do that, but I was so excited about these that I had to immediately read them. And then the last book I got was Die My Love by Ariana Harwicks, and this is a translated fiction book, I believe, as well. Yes, it was, the author is originally from Argentina. So this is a translated book. And the cover is really interesting, and it just sounded like another kind of interesting female character with interesting psychology book. So those are all the books that I hauled. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for my kind of entire year wrap up for 2020, and I'll see you next time.